Hey everybody, it's Eric from epautos.com, your libertarian car guy. This week I'm driving the BMW 2 Series Grand Coupe, about which more later, other than to say, of course, it's a sedan that is styled to look like a coupe. You've probably heard that. But the thing that I wanted to talk about today has to do with the article that I published the other day about the Bronco, the old Bronco versus the new Bronco. I recently test drove the new Bronco. If you're interested in the review, that's also up at EP Autos. But I decided to go back and look into what the old Bronco, the first generation one that came out in 1966, cost, because I was so floored by the cost of the new one. They sent me a strop edition, which is one of the higher trims, and so yeah, it's more expensive, but I mean $75,000. The base edition of the current Bronco is just shy of $40,000, which is getting kind of steep. I love the Bronco. I just wish I could afford one. And a lot of people tell me exactly the same thing, that there are vehicles on the market that they'd like to buy, but they're just out of their price range. So I went back to look into what the original Bronco cost back in 1966, which was the year that the first generation Bronco made its debut. And would you believe, to channel Get Smart, it listed for $2,500. Now, I put that into the federal government's Bureau of Labor Statistics inflation calculator and came out with $25,000. So essentially, you'd have to come up with $25,000 today to equal the purchasing power of $2,500 back in 1966. And here's the problem, as I see it. The problem isn't inflation per se, i.e. the rising cost of things. It's that on average, typically, most of us are not earning, or being paid, I should put it, an amount of money that's sufficient to track with that in congruence. Back in 1966, just about anybody who was gainfully employed could afford to buy a Bronco. Bronco was a cheap vehicle back then. Back then, vehicles like that were cheaper than cars typically were, because they were much more basic. If you've ever been inside a first generation Bronco, you'll know what I mean. Metal interior, round speedometer, a few levers and handles, and that was pretty much it. Very, very basic vehicle. Today's Bronco, of course, is a more sophisticated vehicle, but the point is, you have to come up with nearly $40,000 to buy the thing, and we, as a rule, we meaning regular people, people who are working income and middle income. I don't like to use the word class because that's Marxist verbiage, but the point I'm trying to get across is just regular people used to be able to commonly afford vehicles like the Bronco when they were young. Look at the demographics of people who bought a 4x4 once upon a time. They weren't old guys. Today's Bronco is basically an old guy's car, because pretty much only old guys have the money, to compensate for inflation, to be in a position to buy one. And, this kind of gets into an article that I'm going to have on the site shortly, which is this sort of interesting phenomenon of profits being up in many cases for vehicle manufacturers. I'm focusing on Harley, but the motorcycle manufacturer in this article that I'll have up in a couple of days. But it's also affecting vehicles on four wheels. The vehicles are being sold in smaller numbers at higher prices, and that works for a time, but only insofar as they don't run out of people who are in a position to be able to spend a lot more money on a vehicle. The profit margins are higher, in other words, and the bulk of the people who are in that position as buyers are older people. And those people are not going to be in the market for vehicles very much longer, frankly. They're going to age out. Hang on, let me get around some clovers here. Bye-bye, clovers. Oh, this thing steps out pretty nicely. Anyway, so I think we're going to reach this critical mass moment where there's only going to be a handful of people who can afford to buy a vehicle, and there's not going to be enough money made on those vehicles, even though the margins are higher. And at that point, I think a lot of these brands are going to go belly up. And that kind of gets me into the Deadpool 2026 article that I have up on the site right now, which predicts which brands are most likely to go away in the near-term future. Anyway, thanks as always for listening. If you want to jump into the proverbial conversation, there's a comment section over at EP Autos. It follows every one of my articles, and we don't monetize it, we don't data mine it. You know, it's just a place where you can do what you can't do pretty much anywhere else anymore, which is speak freely without being expected to pay for it. So I hope you'll swing by. Thanks as always for listening. We'll have more for you again soon.